Yo, Seerat Sohi here. Welcome to the Ringer NBA channel. We're back to bring you more coverage of Women's March Madness, and we are very excited to have today with us ESPN analyst, former Tennessee Lady Vol, exceptional analyst, honestly, just like probably one of the biggest rising stars in March Madness, low-key. She's been awesome, so we're just super excited to get her insight today. How is the Madness treating you so far, Andraya?
The madness has been amazing. It has been mad, but in the best use of the word. The performances, I said coming in, I feel like there are so many eyes on the women's tournament, but it's great because the players and the performances, I know they're ready to exceed expectations. I know they're ready to meet the moment. I know they're ready to perform so that all the eyes that are watching get hooked, and the game is going to be better for it. Like, this tournament could be last season's tournament was already game changing, and then this season has just built off of that momentum. So it's been really special.
Yeah, it's been awesome. One team that I think has actually exceeded exceptions to a degree that has ironically made us pay less attention to them, I think, is South Carolina. Just the level at which they have dominated. It's almost been hard to talk about them because there isn't a lot to take away from a game that's over in the first half. Like these games where if they scored what they scored in the first half, and, North Carolina in the second round scored what they scored in the whole game, South Carolina still would have won. They've been so incredibly dominant. They're third in the nation in offense. They're the best defensive team in the nation. They kind of represent one of my favorite things about basketball, where when you have a team that's better than the sum of its parts, there's an expansive quality to that. There's like no telling how good they can be. I'm almost wondering, like, is this almost a team of destiny? It might be early to say that. They still haven't really faced competition that has tested them yet to the degree that we need to see. But I also got to ask you, like, you played in the SEC. You played against South Carolina, Dawn Staley 4 times, and you also covered them when you were covering the SEC network. Like, what is it about her and, that program that makes them so special and so consistently dominant?
Yeah, well, to answer the first question in that, I would say, this is South Carolina's tournament to lose. And it's funny because, it's hard to talk about them quickly because so many times, like, instant analysis is like a logo 3 or a dominant post play, or it's just some player that dominates, right? It's very easy to find a bunch of clips of one player, show that and say, hey, this is the reason that this team is good. But with South Carolina, it's the little things that add up with that team that you really have to take time to show and teach. Like, listen, how hard she rolls to the basket creates the skip pass opportunity, or how she helps on this backside helps create this opportunity for the steal. It's the little things that South Carolina players do consistently over and over again. It's not just one thing. It's not just one player. So to try and break it all down in 30 seconds is really difficult because there are so many levels and layers to what makes this team great. You can't just pinpoint it to one thing, but that's also the reason why they're so great. Because when you only have one, or there's only one aspect of your game that you're dominant in, it's easier to try and isolate that and pick it apart. You can't isolate one thing for South Carolina and try to pick it apart. They're just good at so many things. So with them, you have to pick your poison. I did play against South Carolina. I've watched, one of my close friends growing up in the game was Tiffany Mitchell. And I remember Tiffany Mitchell saying she was going to South Carolina and Dawn Staley. And at the time, South Carolina wasn't a big name. We graduated the same year. And it was almost like Tiffany Mitchell, she's staying close to her hometown. She's from North Carolina, but she's staying close to her hometown. She's staying in her area, going to South Carolina. And it's like, I wonder what Dawn Staley has going on there. And now we see what Dawn Staley has going on there and why that place was so appealing. And for Coach Staley, like, for me, it's just, she has everything in terms of being able to connect to her players personally, being able to develop them as players, being able to get them to understand and commit to their roles, and also know how that fits in the game plan. Like, some coaches might have 3 of those things. It's really rare that coaches have all 4. You connect to your players, They understand their role. They understand how their role fits in the game plan, and they get better year to year. That's why her success, in my opinion, has been sustained. Like, I think it's a little bit easier to bring in a ton of talent and it all fits together and you win one and then it kind of falls apart after that. But she's had pieces that develop year to year. She's brought pieces in that fit really well from the transfer portal and from the freshman class coming in. So to me, it's Coach Staley's understanding of her players as players on the court and as people. Who's going to fit in with my group's personality? What does this group need on a personal level? What does this group need on a basketball level? And how do I get it all to fit and work? She has shown us how to do that year after year. And that's why we've seen this success for Coach Staley and for South Carolina.
So what do you think it has been like over the course of the season that's allowed them to build off, what was really just an interesting nucleus of players at the start of the season that, now is the most dominant force in college basketball?
Yeah, I think it's just step by step. Like, that's the one thing about Dawn Staley in South Carolina is like they don't skip steps. They don't immediately try to get everything to fit all together at once. It's a slow building process. And I think, one of the best examples is when South Carolina played UNC the first time. Freshman Malaysia Fulwiley didn't play very much that game. And that was a close game. Like, that time when they played North Carolina, it was a very close game. I think it was a 7-point game. And Coach Staley was asked about why Fulwiley didn't play. Mind you, Fulwiley's this phenomenal freshman, this offensive powerhouse, but she was missing assignments or missing what she was supposed to do defensively. So Coach Staley didn't play her that game. That's a step that has to be taken for Fulwiley to be better down the road. What did we see Malaysia Fulwiley do against UNC the second time in the tournament? Dominate defensively, blocks, steals, locking up on the defensive end. And then, of course, her offense is able to operate. What is she talking about now? The commitment to defense. So I think it's those type of things, those little lessons that Coach Staley is willing to put her players through so that they're better for it in the end. She does that in the beginning, and that's how the team just keeps getting better. Had Coach Staley let that slide, had she let Malaysia play without committing to the defensive end, we wouldn't see the Fulwiley or the South Carolina team that we see right now. We wouldn't see them. Same thing, like you can imagine the standard that she holds them to in practice. Like, she doesn't let things slip through the crack. And I think holding them, they call it the standard, holding her team consistently to the standard at South Carolina allows them to hold each other to that standard. Everybody's held accountable. And I think that's really special. And you don't see that at a lot of programs. And I think it's funny, there are a lot of people, like what you said earlier about South Carolina hasn't been tested. They either haven't been tested because they've just been that good. Like, they've played good teams, but they're just that good. But even a couple times, they're on the ropes at Tennessee. They're down at halftime at LSU. They're down by, 2 in the SEC championship to Tennessee. And what does she do? She draws up a 3-point shot for Camila Cardoso to hit, has the confidence in Camila. Camila feels that confidence from her coach, and she steps up and knocks it down. Georgia even came out and hit him in the mouth. What could South Carolina have done? They could have been like, whoa, Georgia, we don't know how to react. Georgia's not a very great team. We don't know how to react to this. And what do? They turn the table, they put their foot on the gas, and they run it up. So it's been amazing to me how they've found different ways to win against quality competition. And they've also just found ways to make quality competition look very poor quality. So it's just been impressive all across the board.
Yeah, that's a great point. When they're not an incredible first half team, they are just like the kings of second half adjustments. They are awesome. You bring up Cardoso, who I think if we are gonna talk about one player on that roster, it's probably got to be her. And we have a mailbag question. There was also a great story in The Athletic, again, by Grace Rayner, that came out today about Cardoso's journey from Brazil to Chattanooga to South Carolina, trying to realize her dream of eventually playing in the WNBA. And that is, that it's on the precipice if she wants it. There was also a quote in that story saying, if I had to rank the top bigs in the draft, she would probably be one. That was coming from a WNBA GM, and we had a mailbag question from Danielle Babylon on Twitter. If South Carolina wins it all, with Camila having monster games like she usually does, do you think she rises to the top 2 in the WNBA draft? Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I don't see why Camila wouldn't rise up in the draft rankings. And you could see her. It really just depends on what teams want. It depends on what teams are looking for. It depends on what hole they're trying to fill. But 100%. If Camilla handles her business and is dominant and has a great tournament and ends up winning a national champion, like I've talked to a couple GMs, and there's just something to be said about people that win. Like there's something to be said about being a winner and doing what your team needs to get the win. So I could see it happening. We have a pretty stacked draft. Like at the top, there are a few players that could go 1 through 3, 1 through 4. So I think that fluctuating and moving based on performances in the tournament, that could be like the final factor in teams making their decision for which big that they want.
Mm-hmm. We also, I mean, they're playing Indiana in the Sweet 16, and the spread is favoring them right now by 15.5, which just tells you everything you need to know about their dominance. It's very rare that Vegas is like, yeah, this is going to be a blowout in the Sweet 16. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. We roll the ball out for a reason, but, for this Indiana team, Mackenzie Holmes obviously a problem. They got some shooters that can get hot. Is there any pathway for them to pull off an upset here?
I think if there was a pathway for Indiana, they'd have to have help from South Carolina. South Carolina missing shots, South Carolina shooting. The game that was really close for South Carolina was the Tennessee game in the SEC championship. I think Tennessee hit 8 threes in that game. South Carolina ended up hitting 4, but again, 1 was at the last second. So I think for any team, not just Indiana, but any team that South Carolina could face, the difference has to be 12 to 15 points from the 3-point line. That'll be the difference maker in just keeping a game close. But I still don't think that's the difference maker in another team taking South Carolina down. I just don't. They score in so many different ways. They defend so well. You have these great shooting teams come in, and even shooting threes against them is hard because of their length. And even if you shoot threes, what you risk with shooting threes is South Carolina getting long rebounds and taking it in transition to the other end. So there's just so many aspects, and I've just seen South Carolina win games. And the difference between last season and this season is, last season they had to overcome being a poor shooting team. This season, they're not a poor shooting team. They might have a poor shooting day, but they're not a poor shooting team. And so teams that they're going against, again, like I've said, you have to pick your poison. You can't just let them stand out there and shoot threes. They're going to make those. So for me, 3-point shooting for Indiana could keep the game close. I do think that Mackenzie Holmes, and she's had a great tournament, she's really elite with her footwork. So if she can get angles, one of her best bets might be drawing fouls on Camilla, drawing fouls on Ashlyn Watkins, kind of getting South Carolina in some foul trouble with their mainstays. The hardest part about South Carolina, though, is their depth. Camilla goes to the bench and you roll out Ashlyn Watkins, who could block your shot and dunk on the other end. And you're just what are we supposed to do? So there are some things that I think could come into play with keeping the game close. Again, it's basketball, so anything could happen. But I do think that there'd have to be some help on South Carolina's side, whether it's fouls, poor shooting, and those things. But South Carolina's best can't be beat.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It's also way easier said than done to hit your threes against South Carolina, to your point. They force opponents to shoot 26% from the 3-point line, which is not great, in my opinion. Before we let you go, we got to ask you about a matchup that I think everybody had circled basically as soon as the brackets came out, with LSU and UCLA. I think UCLA was a sleeper pick for a lot of people as well. I guess you can't really be a sleeper when you're a number 2 seed, but when you have a team as dominant as South Carolina, pretty much everybody else becomes a sleeper. But this is a game that's going to have a lot of great matchups. You got Lauren Betts versus Angel Reese, the number 1 and number 3 rebounding teams in the country. Kiki Rice, how is LSU going to handle her? What do you think is a key matchup in that game?
There are so many. I love the matchup between the super sophomores in Kiki Rice and Flau'jae Johnson. The way that those two players have grown their game from last season to this season is so special. You already mentioned the dynamic guards on the outside, right? I think the guard play is going to be huge. Michaela Williams has to be big for LSU, the same way that London Jones has been big for UCLA. Really, when you look at both of these teams, they have size on the inside. They have rebounding on the inside, relentless rebounding on the inside and power. And then they have dynamic scoring on the outside. Starting 5 against starting 5, it is extremely even, in my opinion, because the one thing Angel Reese and Anissa Morrow are so dominant, but the one thing that Lauren Betts has is so much size. right? So like those two players are relentless and they have high motors, but they're going up against a player that has so much size on the defensive end, so much size on the offensive end. So those two in their relentlessness have to overcome being undersized compared to Lauren Betts. To me, it could potentially come down to the guards. But Flage and her defense, I think, will be really big. I think she's had some really big moments, not just on the court, but even in like the post-game press conference. I've been really impressed by Flage's leadership. She's just seemed like the glue that has held this team together. Obviously, we all know LSU has had a lot going on. And Haley Van Lith is going to be big. Like if LSU wants to beat UCLA and then go on to win and try to make a Final Four run, they'll need Haley Van Lith to play well and play with confidence and be the player that we all know she's capable of being. It's great that they've been able to win without her, but I am interested in seeing if these few days of practice, and obviously they had to travel and everything like that, but few days of sorting things out can get them clicking on all cylinders.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that though the question we've been kind of asking them, waiting for the moment that they actually do start to click on all cylinders this season? It just hasn't seemed to happen for reasons, on the court, off the court, a lot going on that team. But, bringing up Haley Van Lith, she definitely strikes me as an X factor, but I also wonder, like with Kiki Rice, how much is she going to be on the floor? Are we going to see a repeat of their second round game where she's on the bench to start the second half? Obviously, she bounced back from that incredibly, like just got in the lowest stance I've ever seen and just played some really hard defense, got that team going. But I guess I have questions, like, when it comes down to if it turns out the rebounding and the bigs are a wash, part of me is wondering, okay, can I rely a little bit more on UCLA? I need them to hit their shots, but just as far as combustibility goes, like when things get hard, I almost wonder, and I'm no disrespect to LSU, a team that won the championship last year, but it just feels like they're waiting to blow. It feels like they're waiting for somebody to just apply the right amount of pressure, and I just feel like this UCLA team with its depth, like they could be that team.
Yeah, I mean, this is a heavyweight on heavyweight matchup, like 110% through and through. I give LSU a little bit of a nod in terms of they've been there. Like the one thing you can't take away from Haley Van Lith is that she's been to a Final Four before. Like she knows what it takes to get there. And so do most of those players on LSU's team. And then with UCLA, obviously Lauren Betts has made a run and has been deep in the tournament with Stanford, but they got upset last season. So sometimes those feelings, when a team starts to pull off an upset, those feelings start to come back. You're like, oh no, here we go again, right? And so I do think though the guards and the veteran guard play of UCLA could be huge. Like Charisma Osborne, London Jones, Kiki Rice. Charisma could be a huge X factor. Her ability to get to the rim, her ability to push in transition, but it does come down to knocking down shots. And when you look at both teams, when you look at LSU's last game and when you look at UCLA's last game, they ended up being close games. Where I give LSU a little bit more of a nod is they ended up having balanced scoring, like 4 players in double figures to contribute to that win, whereas UCLA relied heavily on Kiki Rice and Lauren Betts. Kiki Rice was in the 20s, Lauren Betts was in the 20s. So relying heavily on 2 players, they need a little bit more balance, in my opinion. 2 players aren't going to get it done, and going into 2 players, they're going to have balance from everybody. But I give nods to both teams. Like I go back and forth saying, well, LSU has this advantage. Well, UCLA has this advantage. Well, LSU could do this and UCLA could do this. So I go back and forth. That's the best part about the matchup is it's really difficult to pick a side. Like you just have to let the game play out.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's like I've been going back and forth in my head about it. My bracket has UCLA, so I got to stick with them. But who's in your Final Four?
My Final Four is LSU, USC, Texas, and South Carolina.
I like it. Madison Booker has been one of my favorites to watch so far. Like, oh God, she's just incredible.
The game is in such great hands when you think about the freshmen and the sophomores. And I know we're losing amazing players, which we do every year, but just thinking about the future and the careers that we're going to get to watch for the next 3 years is unbelievable.
No, yeah, absolutely. Juju, Hannah Hidalgo, like there's just like there's too many to name, and it's been so fun watching them grow, and we're gonna get more of a chance to do that. And we look forward to your analysis and stuff, and how you cover the rest of the tournament. Thanks for sparing some time, and good luck with the rest of the road here.
Thank you for having me. No problem. Enjoy the games.